Yeah, well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I don't know if anyone's actually wished you that already, but as you can tell, I'm actually broadcasting from Gloucestershire. My accent. Gloucestershire born and bred, not. Usually I'm accompanied by lots of Irish people this week in Cheltenham, but sadly not this week. So I'm trying to keep the atmosphere up here just on my own. Sorry we can't be together. Anyway, so. Thanks, Robin, for the introduction. I want to really just think about my journey with working with people on innovation, trying to make innovation happen as opposed to leaving it to chance. And some of what I'm going to talk about actually is based on something I wrote a little while ago, a couple of years ago now. The references on the screen there, where we actually spent a whole chapter on cybersecurity and innovation. And in fact, I think that was the chapter name. And I thought actually I probably should have strengthened the idea of the relationship between cyber security and innovation a little more. And I've done that for this presentation, which is to say, cybersecurity through innovation. And I'm going to pitch to you today that actually innovation is an essential part of cybersecurity, not just something that we do alongside and may happen or not. And that's for a number of reasons, which we'll go into. I am a director at Templar Executives, although today I'm really going to offer my own views, my own personal views on cybersecurity and innovation. So I've abandoned the normal Templar Executives PowerPoint template so that I could actually put the shamrocks on and talk about this. The bottom line, I suppose, that I really want to talk about is, as I've mentioned, innovation is essential in cybersecurity and it needs planned assistance. So what does that look like will be part of the discussion that I want to develop today. Now, why do I say that innovation is essential in cybersecurity? Well, I think the first thing is to understand that the domain in which we work, our lives, connected lives, is a contested space. Maybe it's not surprising for someone who's ex-military a long time ago to talk about that, but actually we are working in an environment where adversaries have a say. They respond to the way that we work, and we then respond to trying to protect ourselves against their innovation and so on. So we are in fact in a relationship. And in that contested space, without innovation, we don't quickly get to the countermeasures that we need in order to protect ourselves. So that's a fundamental element of why innovation is an essential part of cybersecurity, because of that arms race, because of that relationship. And any national strategy, regional strategy, or business strategy must think about innovation as part of its approach to cybersecurity. We'll try and examine how that's been done in the past. In this panel, we're actually going to be having someone looking at the future. And so I want to spend a little bit of time of talking about how we got here, and then looking at a couple of examples of innovation as it's described by others in awards and that sort of thing for innovation, and look at some examples of where assistance has been provided or policies are in place in order to give innovation a better chance of happening. So with that in mind, I'd want you to actually cast your mind back to 2013, if you can. I don't know if we've got any undergraduates on this from Plymouth University or something like that, but I mean, that might be the stuff of history books at this point for some people in the audience, and others it's just like yesterday, and so on. But now, I don't know, has anybody got any views on what were the headlines? The big global cybersecurity headlines of 2013. I'm not sure if I can see the chat function here, actually, but if you might want to put a few ideas in there. And by the way, this game is essentially you've got to guess what's on my slide rather than what you remember. I think that's probably a more accurate way of thinking about this. Yeah. Okay, well, while you're thinking about it, I'm going to put up mine. Okay, here's two for you. Okay, Edward Snowden's papers, as it were, or what many would refer to as a data breach, a very significant leak of international proportions with significance for UK national security. And of course, a debate that has raged since about the extent to which he was doing us a favour, the extent to which he was causing a great deal of harm, and so on. Of course, he settled abroad in this regard, in a country which tends still to be giving us quite a few headaches in terms of what we're responding to in cyberspace and where we need to be innovative. So talking about Russia, and of course, another big story of the time was really one of the first exposes of what has become known as advanced persistent threat, in this case, APT1 by Mandiant. That was the company, now part of FireEye, that actually did that expose. So that was happening in 2013. Of course, APT1 had been assessed as operating for many years before that, but it's really around this time where there's public consciousness of this as a term, I would say. So what has this got to do with innovation? Well, let's have a look at some award categories for innovation. And when I was putting together this book chapter a while ago now, I was really trying to think about, what were the indicators of innovation? How could we try and give a sense of the trends of how innovation was occurring? And I thought, well, actually, what are the categories in awards ceremonies that people get awards for in terms of innovation? So I thought I'd try and get some data on that, because normally it's very well published and people talk about it on their own websites about the awards that they've got for innovation and so on. And one of the major awards that gets discussed widely is, for instance, SC Magazine Awards, which have awards in Europe and they have awards in the US. And in this instance, I've just picked some of the headline named awards of the periods 2013 to 2018, where there were categories. And so in between these two tables on the screen here, you see there's a gap, and there's a whole list of other awards actually in this as well. And I just want to show you one or two things based on what we've just talked about in terms of the Snowden and APT. So at the top there, you can see Best Anti-Malware Gateway, which was an award in 2013, but was not an award after that. We also had the same goes for Best Enterprise Firewall, Best Intrusion Detection System, and so on, but those actually don't feature as separate categories as we go forward. As we look at later awards then from 2016 onwards in this, you'll see that actually there's a number of new categories of award that have come in. And I suppose it's no surprise that Best Advanced Persistent Threat Protection appears in 2014, having had Mandate's expose in 2013 here. So I suppose there's a question about, well, what can we draw from this? What might we say about the way that awards are named and develop as technology changes? Or, as I think in this case, as we're exposed to different events which make us think about the problems we have. And what can we then draw from that in terms of how we think about innovation and address the problems that are on our minds? And so the Best Advanced Threat Protection award wasn't available in 2013, but it has been, as far as I know, available ever since. I haven't looked particularly at since 2018, but I'll leave you to continue that and perhaps write the next paper. Behavioral analytics gets a mention there for a couple of years before I think it's subsumed into more integrated solutions, which can be discussed as best threat detection technologies or threat intelligence technology and so on, which will be taking data feeds from different types of activity, both behavioral analytics of people on networks, of people perhaps in HR records, through to network monitoring in other events and so on. So I think you can see a technological change here within this. In part, I describe it as a move away from tools to more integrated solutions. In part, we see more computational power, and we see the application of data analytics in terms of the way that innovation is changing, even over this relatively brief period. However, what I want to leave you with in this regard is that I think we also have a marketing story, a marketing narrative, which says we had a problem last year and now we've got an award this year for that. So we'll look at that a little bit more. Maybe that's something we want to discuss actually as part of this panel. So who won the Best Advanced Persistent Threat Protection Prize in 2014? I'm not going to ask you to actually put that in the chat because I'll tell you now. Here you go. It was WebSense by Triton Enterprises in that particular year. And I've put up quite a lot of text here for you to look at. But on this occasion, we're all in front row seats, I think, at this conference. So hopefully that's not too difficult for you to look at. I've highlighted a few elements here. You can see that this particular solution, according to the judges and what is written by the company itself, illustrates the need to protect data, not just when it is being communicated, but also when it is being stored, and so on. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we would expect that today, I'm sure, but I think it also harks back to what was some of the things exposed under Snowden, where, for instance, data in transit was not encrypted, this sort of thing. Okay, so I don't believe that's an accident, by the way, that this is in the narrative the following year. It uses the term signature-less threat identification, which again illustrates this move away from having simply a malware gateway detecting signatures as packets come through or whatever. You've got to think about other elements, other ways of detecting threats once they're on your network, for instance, which would be, again, something that you would expect people to be talking about the year after advanced persistent threat is exposed as well. What we also see is this notion of real-time analysis and computational power. So they talk about 10,000 plus analytics and so on. They're giving a sense of how innovation in this is applying advanced techniques and technologies towards understanding the threat. Now, we see some of this actually following through into 2018. So this is at the end of the period that I looked at here, and the best SIEM solution, again, the word solution rather than necessarily a tool. We're often talking about a set of tools in this instance. So this is spotting incidents on networks that might be of concern in terms of the development of a security incident in some way, of course. And I'll just let you read through that. But essentially, I feel I should read it out in an American accent, but I'm going to spare you that. But we understand that there really can be too much of a good thing, too much data, too many tools, and so on and so forth. So what this particular solution is offering customers is that churns through high volumes of data. Okay, another theme relating to computational power. Signatureless, 4 years on, is still something that is being discussed here, which is, I think, coded phrase for some form of machine learning or analytics or artificial intelligence, as it might be described by companies today. Behavior-based analytics on networks and so on. And it actually goes on to talk about how this reduces the number of security alerts by up to 95%, which saves time and resources because InfoSec professionals can respond to the highest risk events, not false alarms and so on. So this machine is really helping you focus on what's important. Okay, and again, promoting this as not only innovative, but actually a way of saving time, making you more efficient, and so on and so forth. Tackling the problem in a number of ways. And so from what I've described here, I think we can detect sort of a language of cybersecurity threat detection in this. I've mentioned from tools to solutions, and actually service models as well, that others will do this on your behalf. Partly that's to do with where does computational power sit. We see solutions, for instance, which talk about having computational power at the center, which churns through the data and then tells you what's happening live, on the fly, and so on. And then other solutions, when you look at the awards, which are claiming that you don't need that computational power necessarily at the center. In fact, you can have less computational power, but the analytics are happening at the edge, allows you to deploy to devices with smaller processors and identify threats as they come in through endpoints and so on. And so you get this, I think, different marketing ploys here about how something is scaled or deployed and the efficiencies of it, and whether you need a big computer or whether you can put it out to the edge, and so on. We also get this idea of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, and I think we can all agree that for many products that are on the market at the moment, they're often described in applying advanced artificial intelligence, and actually there are examples of that. But it's rare to see anybody saying that they're just using bog standard artificial intelligence. There's always advanced AI in this, which causes that issue of trying to separate the hype from the reality. And I know these themes will develop in the rest of this panel as well in relation to other technologies and similar technologies. We've got the development of both supervised and unsupervised machine learning, issues around what we call weak signals and slow onset attacks, which by that I mean that someone could be on your network for a long period of time. The indicators of that are small or weak, and therefore trying to find out that an attack is underway, has been developing over a long period, is rather challenging, particularly when you're using technology which is looking out for anomalies on a network, and yet these signatures are so small they don't look like anomalies, or after 6 months of work they actually look like part of what's normal, what you'd expect to see. We also see development and discussions around innovation about having to go beyond the perimeter into, for instance, scanning the networks where hackers gather and forums and so on, to really get a sense of what might be coming down the line, trying to go beyond your perimeter so that you can develop some form of early warning. You mightn't do that yourself, but you might be engaged with others who do that sort of thing for you in order to provide you with that early warning. So it's not enough to simply wait until attackers are on your network or trying to get through your perimeter and so on. You want to go forward about it. So again, it's about really creating more in-depth cybersecurity technologies. We also see the development through this period. In fact, there are awards through into 2018 around deception technologies. So the idea that, for instance, you can develop honey nets and honey traps to attract people into networks which are not your real functional networks, but are there for to really divert attackers somewhere else, but also give you an opportunity to understand how they operate and how they work, and to learn about your adversary in order to counter them. And as I mentioned earlier, return on investment considerations as well. So, and I put in a couple of quotes there. Tech companies must show that they are not simply technically good, but that they meet the investment criteria of companies where security staff have to bid for budget and justify expenditure. The number of digital assets leaked or shared, these sort of metrics, better educated employees, time saved due to automation. These are all ways of trying to show why your product is different, why your product is more innovative, why your product solves a problem that others don't in a better way. So that's the language that I see over just looking at award ceremonies and so on as an indicator of innovation within the cybersecurity sector. Now, I will make another couple of observations on this. First of all, it's not simply marketing hype. Okay, these awards ceremonies reflect, I think, the emerging language and concerns of the community. That actually that's a response to the complexity and the scale of the cyber challenges we face, and it demands innovation for the reasons I've said before, and we need compelling responses to deal with the level of the threat as it's developing and continues to develop dynamically. What I think is really important when we look at all of these examples is the cross-domain working that's apparent in this, whether it's working with people who can deliver you computing power at the edge, whether it's looking at imaging or sensors or business processes or software development or engineering or data science and so on and so forth, that all of these together mean that information is shared from between domains, and you increase the chance of something innovative coming from this. When I first started working with the Cybersecurity Knowledge Transfer Network many years ago when I was at Kinetic, what struck me as someone who was stepping into the cybersecurity world from military domain, essentially, was that I've met a community that seemed to be, that thought they were working on unique problems to them. And what I found was it seemed to have a lot of the similar problems to the domains that I was working in. So for example, people would be saying, we need to make this a board level issue. Whatever the topic was, you know, it could be cybersecurity, it could be compliance, it could be health and safety. But the question that was being addressed was, how do we make this relevant to a board? How do we make this relevant to a business? Okay, and so we could take ideas from one domain about how they made it relevant to the board and apply it into another domain in order to make it relevant to the board. So this sort of working, or how advances in data science and machine learning can be applied both into the interpretation of medical imaging and the interpretation of behaviors on a network. So again, when we're talking about innovation here, it's not simply about straightforward invention because no one's ever thought of this idea before. It's about providing opportunities for these sectors, these domains, which work closely together, perhaps don't meet often enough, to share ideas and solve important problems. I'm just conscious of the time here. I've got a few more minutes. I just want to scoot through a couple of other things to give you an illustration. This, at the same time, same period, 2014 to 2018, gives you a sense of what CNBC was calling your Disruptor 50 companies. And the sort of thing that they were looking at here was market sector. They were looking at the customer base. They were looking at feedback from customers. They were looking at published product reviews. They were looking at corporate marketing and branding. They were looking at things like interviews with senior management, and they were ranking the top 50 companies. I put the ones in red that are actually have got cybersecurity as part of their portfolio in terms of things that were published at this time. So you can see a general trend to more cybersecurity companies perhaps being in that 50. Well done, Darktrace. There you are, 2018 as well. 34 out of 50 it is globally as well. So interesting, I think, in terms of have a look at where SpaceX has been for those period of times, just by the way, or where Airbnb comes in from 41 in 2014 to number 1 in 2017. Interesting when we think about how these trends are reflected in industry overview. Another view to take is, for example, Cybersecurity Ventures looks at, I think it's around 150 countries that they report, companies today that they report on. At this time, at this period, they were looking at 500 companies that they reported on every year, which allowed us to do some data analysis on which countries were these 500 cybersecurity companies based. So any ideas in the top 3 countries that these 500 companies were spread across? I'll think about that for a moment. There you go. United States number 1, yeah. Okay, what's number 2? Any ideas? Okay, well here's the list. Okay, United States, Israel, United Kingdom, Canada, and so on down. Now, it's my contention that these statistics, particularly in the case of Israel, it doesn't happen by accident. There must be something else happening around interventions that create this level of innovation in terms of companies listed within this 500. Okay. Which brings me to that sort of planned assistant point. I want to introduce someone who was writing at 2017 at the time in Forbes, I think, said, look, there's 6 factors why Israel is a powerhouse when it comes to this sort of thing. And I've listed them here, or summarized them here. Essentially, this idea of the Israeli government playing an advisory and coordination role in developing an ecosystem that is constantly evolving to meet needs between governments, business, universities, and so on. By the way, that sort of advisory and coordination role at this time is pitched as not being a command and control or ownership relationship, but rather one which remains a slight distance, so to allow companies to work with Israel and so on and so forth. You know, some of the politics around here. Government is a business catalyst. It actually designed the strategy to with a vision about where they wanted to be. It actually created a culture within the military to try and get military units to act as startup incubators and accelerators in terms of their own innovation thinking. And of course, with most people coming through national service in this regard, you know, it was trying to train a mindset about innovation through the military as well, and then back out into to work on security in industry. It's an interesting one. Skills is there as well. Interdisciplinarity mentioned, and this sort of strategic pivot in the last one there, where, you know, changing old thinking from who might attack Israel, which is the way Israel was sort of configured with its neighbors and so on, into, you know, what threats might Israel face in the future and so on. I find that quite interesting. Okay, I want to leave you with a few thoughts then, just to as a wrap up here. Now, in that book chapter, I draw heavily on Greg Satell's work on mapping innovation, which is worth looking at. He's previously at IBM and so on. And I try to say, well, what do his ideas mean for cybersecurity? Actively seek out good problems. Okay, you don't need a brilliant idea, you just need a good cybersecurity problem. And by the way, there's plenty to choose from. All right, so think about addressing a problem and how can you address that with the technology that you've got, the ideas that you're developing. It's not just many domains to be involved in the solution, but many domains in which the solution might be applied. In other words, that you can create these interdisciplinary teams, come from different domains, but then your solution can be applied in different domains, law enforcement through to health and so on and so forth. Think about your culture, think about your strategy, think about the way you work. And what you bring into that, because we need diversity in cybersecurity. Many of the problems we face are non-technical, about how do people protect themselves, how do people create processes or organize themselves in such a way that they manage their information risk. And so, you know, how do you contribute into that? Leverage platforms to access talent and technology, things like this particular network, this conference today as well, for instance. Get on it like you are at the moment. You know, that collaborative culture, getting meeting of minds around the important problems that need to be solved. And understanding that innovation is messy, and just because there's a national strategy and there's a hub and all the rest of it doesn't mean that it guarantees innovation, but you're trying to give it the best chance of success, really. I think that last point there is what we'll finish on. Today's solutions may face the perfect countermeasure. This isn't finished with one innovation. You know, fixing a problem today is likely to need further innovation tomorrow. So anyway, we can talk about what the future looks like in part of the panel. I think, given what I've presented here, we're going to be talking about SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange for a while. And I'll leave that and hand back to Robin.